Today's episode is brought to you by Create Engage, the digital marketing agency for the disruptive management consultancy. Digital marketing has moved forwards, but most consulting firms haven't. Many consulting firms still see their corporate blog as their sole digital marketing channel and find themselves frustrated when these blogs yield little, if any, results. For those consultancies that understand digital marketing, though, it can be a huge asset and help them achieve rapid business growth. In fact, at Create Engage, we've recently written a case study of one successful consulting firm that used digital marketing to help them grow over 400% in just 3 years. Having spent countless hours researching consulting firms and consulting leaders for this podcast, it became very clear that while some firms do digital marketing well, the vast majority of consulting firms struggle to leverage its power and don't know where to start. To help those of you who want to harness the power of digital marketing to grow your consulting business, but don't have the knowledge, capacity, or in-house capability to do so, I launched Create Engage, the first digital marketing agency for the management consulting industry. As former consultants ourselves, we understand the challenges that you face when it comes to delivering effective digital marketing that engages prospective clients and generates leads. Having worked in the industry, we understand consulting buyers, what resonates with them and what doesn't. This enables us to harness the latest in digital marketing in a way that aligns with your brand and your market positioning to attract the prospective clients that you're looking to target. We understand that each consultancy is unique and have a range of services to help you shape, implement, and sustain effective digital marketing strategies that deliver results, regardless of where you are on your digital marketing journey. If you would like to find out more about how Create Engage can help you use digital marketing to take your business to the next level, then send me an email at nick@createengage.co.uk or go to our website, createengage.co.uk, where you can download that free case study that breaks down the digital marketing strategies used by one successful consulting firm to help them grow over 400% in just 3 years and gives you the secrets they used so that you can apply them in your own firm. If you want to outpace your competitors and stand out in the crowded consulting market, then get in touch. We'd love to help you grow your business through digital marketing. Hi, and welcome to Climate Consulting. Before going on to introduce today's guest, I wanted just to say two small things. Firstly, today's episode is the last in the mini-series of round 2 interviews that I've been doing over the last 2 months. I've really enjoyed going back to speak to my former guests, and I've had some great feedback on these episodes, but I'd love to get your thoughts. Have you enjoyed them? Have you enjoyed listening to how my former guests, consulting firms, their careers and their views on the industry have evolved over that time? Have you learned something from them? Would you like me to do more of them? And that's the main question. As I'm lining up guests for autumn, I'm really starting to think, who should I be getting on the show? And I want your input and your thoughts on that. I've got some great guests lined up already, but would you like me to get more guests back for round 2s? Would you like me to get brand new guests from firms that you've not heard from on the show? Please let me know. Just drop me an email, nick@createengage.co.uk. And if you want more round 2s, I will make sure that we get them in. If you'd just like me to stick with new guests, that will be the direction we take. Secondly, this is going to be the last new episode before our summer break. Just as I did last year, we'll be taking a short break while people are on holiday and to give you a chance to listen back to your favorite guest or to catch up on those interviews you've missed. I regularly get messages from listeners and speak to listeners who love the show and just say, I've not had a chance to listen to everyone, or I want to go back because I joined the series late and I know there's so many guests to listen to before. Now's your chance. Don't worry, though, I will be back in autumn. The podcast will be back in autumn, and I have some fantastic guests lined up. I can't say who yet, but I know that you are going to love listening to them and get so much from their advice and insights. But before then, back to today's episode, our final round 2 interview before the summer break. In today's episode, I speak to former guest Simon Dennis and his fellow Gate 1 partner, David Holliday. Since Simon first appeared on the show back in 2018, Gate 1 have gone from strength. Since Simon first appeared on the show back in 2018, Gate 1 have gone from strength to strength, growing the team to over 100 consultants and expanding internationally. Last year, that success culminated in the firm being acquired by Havas, a meeting of minds and a partnership designed to accelerate Gate One's growth even further. In this conversation, we go into detail on Gate One's journey over the last 18 months and dig into the story of the acquisition process, including how the deal came about and the process, discussions, the decisions that went into that sale to Havas. How the Gate One team managed that integration process, doing so during COVID and remote working, and their advice to others considering or in the process of doing the same. And Gate One's plans for the future, their international expansion, and how the Havas partnership has helped accelerate their journey for them. And Gate One's plans for the future, their international expansion, and how the Havas partnership has helped accelerate this journey for them. This episode really does lift the lid on everything that goes into a consulting acquisition, something that we really don't hear that much about in our industry. We hear a lot of the success stories, we hear a lot of the end result, but we don't hear a lot of the behind the scenes, what goes into that. This episode gives you everything you want to know about that and more. From the cultural to the financial, everything in between. Simon and David share their journey, and I know that you are going to get so much from what they have to say. So, with the intro done, everything said, sit back, relax, enjoy my conversation with Simon Dennis and David Holliday. Simon, David, welcome to the show.
Hi, Nick.
Hi, Nick. Pleasure to be here.
Oh, it's great to have you both. And I know a lot has changed in 3 years, not least the office. This is a much fancier setup we have here than when, Si, you and I were recording in a WeWork with, what was our sort of slightly dodgy podcast kit way back 3 years ago.
Yeah, a bit of an upgrade, eh?
Well, and I know we're going to talk all about that. And David, thank you for joining us as well, because I think it's going to be really good to get two parts of the story. Obviously, Simon told the story well last time. It'd be great to get your take and how much of what he said was true, how much you see is slightly different, and what's been going on since, guys. To kick us off, maybe we start there. I'm conscious it's been 3 years, obviously, so we've kept in touch, and I know a little bit about the journey, but a lot has happened. So for our listeners, it'd be great if we could kick off with what has been going on for Gate One over the last 3 years.
Yeah, just one or two things. Obviously, we talked about, I guess, the initial years and the genesis of the business and years 1 to 5 when we spoke before, Nick. So since that point, which was early
2018.
2018, yeah. So probably about 60 people at that point. So we have potted summary. Obviously, we've expanded our client base. We've developed a lot of new capabilities and services. We've won our first MCA award. Broke into the Sunday Times Best Companies list. So we're at 22 last year. We've entered into an acquisition with Havas. Welcome to the Havas village, Nick.
It is a lovely. Well, I now live in a village. It looks a little different to mine, but it is a lovely village.
I'll explain the lingo in a minute. We've obviously managed through the small matter of a global pandemic, in which we lost a third of our client order book, which was interesting. We've grown our team, so to about 130 now. And certainly in very strong growth mode just at the minute. And we've taken the business international. It's definitely a big milestone in the last few months. So other than that, it's been a fairly calm, uneventful couple of years.
Wow. Well, we've got 2 hours and we're going to try and cover as much of that as possible. It's partly why we had two of you here, because I think there's more than one person can cover there. And I mean, maybe we start with that. So you mentioned around, we're in a village, which is news to me, and sort of living in one that looks very different. But that point around sort of being part of Havas, I mean, for those who don't know, who may be from a consulting background, Havas are a large marketing organization, sort of global marketing group. It'd be great to maybe start with actually if one of you could give a bit of context to who is the company who's become your parent and you've merged with, because I think that's going to set the scene for a lot of what we talk about today.
Yeah, sure, Nick. Well, why don't I take that? I mean, it's an interesting space, the media and marketing world. There's been a lot of disruption in the last few years, driven by huge advances in technology and data and customer-driven personalization and change. And, as Havas is one of a number of large media and marketing organizations globally. And, like a lot of agencies, they're sort of wrestling with how do they help their clients going forward and, move beyond the brief. How do they help their clients organize? What to in-house, what kind of tech stacks to use, how to drive insights from data, how to land sort of significant sort of customer-centric change. So it's quite an interesting space for us. And when Havas came out as one of the potential suitors for us, really interesting rationale overall. And, when we scratched the surface of what it was really about, we found that actually a lot of global consultancies had started to move into this space, had started to acquire lots of creative agencies, some successfully, some with very mixed results. But very few had sort of gone the other way, and very few management consultancies, at least in the UK, had joined large marketing organisations. And for us, that was really exciting space to sort of think about, and that whole concept of putting creativity and consulting together. The village model is an interesting one, and actually was a core reason why we wanted to join Havas. It's really about putting the best of the best agencies in one physical roof. They operate independently, but they also collaborate on key clients, which is perfect for us when we start to talk about, our red lines and the things that, we really wanted out of a relationship with a partner. And from a mission point of view, their whole concept is around meaningful brands. And, making sure that their organizations, have a resonance, a long-term resonance with their customers. And that really chimed with us with our own mission statement about meaningful change. So when you put all of that together, it was a really exciting proposition and, a great sort of parent to join.
And I think just to add to that, all of that's true, obviously. From our team's perspective, it also means wearing tighter jeans to work and socks strictly optional these days.
And growing a beard for Simon as well.
It is a very striking beard, so, and I was pleased to see that you dressed up for today's interview on more socks. So.
One of the less glamorous changes in the last 3 years.
I do want to come on to that, I guess, cultural integration piece. But David, to your point around a lot of consulting firms are buying up marketing agencies, and obviously there is a move towards that sort of, I guess, combination offering. I asked this for others who maybe don't know the marketing side quite as well, but having a foot in both camps, I feel I can say this in that, consulting is typically considered by consultants strategic, complex. Marketing is considered colouring in. And I have this conversation on a regular basis with prospective clients who are consultants. And I'd just love to understand actually a bit more about how those propositions come together, because for some listeners, they'll be thinking, there's yes, my op model has colours, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go and get the crayons out and do a pretty brochure. How do you actually bring those offerings together? How's that sort of helped your client proposition and Havas and the others in the village?
I mean, lots of different sort of dimensions to that, Nick. I mean, we're, about a year and a half into the relationship with Havas, and mostly under pandemic, but already we're seeing lots of different ways that we're collaborating with them on joint propositions, on helping different clients. So whether that's with data analytics and with the data science teams that are in Havas, whether that's customer experience and providing more of the customer experience design that we can provide with the creativity of the branding and agencies. There's lots of different ways. We're also spinning up new propositions around sustainability and finding that actually across the village, there's a lot of different agencies that are already operating in that space. And when you put all of that together, there's some really interesting propositions coming out. So, I think we barely scratched sort of 5% of what we can do in that space, but it's already a great start. And, now we're starting to filter back into Havas and, seeing people face to face. It's only going to go from strength to strength here in the UK.
I think marketeers and consultants are, that they may look different and they certainly sound different, and we call each other out on our, proverbial bingo, but they're much closer cousins than we probably realized. I think at the end of the day, we're in the business of helping clients to develop excellent products and services based on intelligent customer insights, and then executing that brilliantly, or designing, planning and executing that brilliantly. So we're obviously at different places in the value chain, but that's why it's so complementary. And, now that we've lived in the village for a year, as Dave said, we're really getting a feel for, where the collaboration is most effective and where we get best bang for buck both ways.
I obviously approach that question, being a former consultant in a consulting podcast, from the consulting angle, but I'd love to ask the other way of, when you first came to the village and everyone, is there a village pub just or does the metaphor not extend that far?
I mean, there's free drinks on a Thursday night, and that really helps, get people to know each other.
Yeah, so it helps the integration.
Well, let's maybe use
lubricates the collaboration.
Well, so you're at the the village pub on a Thursday night, and I'd love to know actually, what did you have to do to almost sort of, were there any myths you had to dispel for your marketing colleagues about what consultants are? Did they have any biases or questions or concerns that you had to sort of, help them understand how you could support them, not just how they could support you?
I mean, overall, yes, we've spent a lot of time sort of working with the different agencies. They're all different, and they all come from a different mindset. Some of them intrinsically got what we did because they're in a closer space with similar buyers. Others are in a very different world of PR communications, and partly it was just about spending a lot of time with them and their teams and understanding actually there's quite a lot that binds us together in terms of culture and values. And once you start to talk each other's language and you start to get under the skin of actually, well, what do you really do? No, tell me what you really do. You can really start to, do some joint work together. And once you've done one or two projects, the rest snowballs from there. So we found that already with, several of the agencies that are in the village, and, the others we're sort of working through post-pandemic now. But there hasn't been a one size fits all, actually. It's been quite interesting because there's such a huge variety of different agencies within Havas that are all brilliant in their specialist fields. Part of the fun of moving into the village is just to get to know what they do. And there's some really cool people, far cooler than many of us, in fact.
I think the common factor is that every agency, and I mean, just getting used to calling ourselves an agency was part of the one of the strange things about getting used to this model. But every agency is wired to collaborate, and there's no resistance, there's no closed doors. It's very much kind of open book on relationships and where can we all serve our clients better by working together. And I think that's a very rare model, even where other organizations are trying to compete in the same space.
I'd be really interested how that model works, actually. And I know you mentioned you're only a year or so in, so if it's still coming clear, stop me. But I think backside to one of our first podcast where we talked about the sort of difference between a small consultancy and a big consultancy model. And as we all know, sometimes one of the tensions in bigger firms is you get sort of that partnership structure where you're incentivized to compete. And I'd love to understand actually how that model works, because you're all still separate businesses, separate P&Ls. How does that, is it just ingrained? Is there sort of some formal structures that encourage that collaboration? What makes that work, and what stops it just being on the surface collaborative, but actually at the heart, more competitive?
My main thoughts on that, Nick, is unlike some of the other marketing holding companies, a lot of the acquisitions that Havas have done, they've been very thoughtful to make sure there hasn't been that overlap in competing services. So you don't create that internal environment, which is a bit dog eat dog, So what it's meant for us is, we're a management consultancy within Havas that is very complementary to everything else that the agencies are doing. There is no cannibalization, that drives those inherent challenges. And we've seen that in other holding companies. So it starts with that. And I think, it ends with just a great group of people who are just genuinely curious about what each other's doing and how they can work together. And if you spend more and more time, you inevitably find the opportunities to do so.
I think what we've also been struck by is the notion of group here in Havas is a very thin layer. And the thought and the effort that goes into collaboration is all about the environmental factors. You've seen yourself the kind of office layout, Nick, and it's all about providing the great ambience, and then let people naturally collaborate, because they're the kind of businesses that we bring into the group. We don't spend a huge amount of time thinking about over convoluted incentivization structures, how to, do gain shares and all of these things, which can actually have counterintuitive effects. Put the effort into the environmental conditions and then watch great people do great work. And it really works.
No, it sounds it. And I want to touch on another piece actually that you mentioned, the sort of that journey was the people. And obviously for yourselves, as the director of the company, you're having some of these sort of conversations with the others in the village. This may be a short question because it may be the same for your team, but actually how have your team found that adaptation, particularly if you're not involved day to day in that collaboration? It must feel a little alien if you're used to wearing a suit and suddenly, you don't have to wear your socks. Maybe that's what they wanted all along. I don't know.
I think they were all happy to, turn up wearing what they want, to be fair. We were in a previous WeWork, and it was always quite a relaxed sort of creative style consultancy that we were trying to build rather than something which was a bit more at the more formal end. So it felt like a natural sort of fit overall. And there's been a lot of opportunities for our team to sort of get involved with, the different agencies, in lots of different ways. We're learning huge amounts on how to tell a story, properly, how to avoid packing so many words on a single slide, which is, the criminal offence from a consulting firm. We're learning a lot around how they deal with diversity and inclusion and lots of other things. And, there's loads of avenues for our team to be working with the agencies and the rest of the village at all sorts of different levels. So, but again, we've already just started, because of the pandemic and because of the last 12 months, we're hoping now we're all under one physical roof. There's going to be even more sort of opportunities for that going forward.
I think that's the thing. And we might come on to talk about how the team have felt about the difference, a little bit later. But fundamentally, we feel, David and I, as founders of the business, we've given up so little to get to this point. We're still an autonomous brand. We can work with whichever clients we want. We don't have the kind of audit constrictions that other consultancies have. We can still, bring in the people that we want. We have control over our strategy, pretty much everything. And yet we've gained so much, the infrastructure, the office, the back office, the new business capability, swanky podcast studio, and in particular, access, as David said, to this universe of fantastic capabilities that are complementary to ours and their client base. So enormous upside, and without having to sacrifice any of our core kind of value proposition to our clients or our people, we can now offer so much more to both of those, really key communities.
You teed me up for it there, Simon. So why don't we come on to it now? Because that point around people and the cultural side is something that stood out for me when we spoke last time. And I was sort of listening back through our interview, and remind me, I need to give you your Daniel Pink recommendations have been great. So it's, and your Seth Godin. So, but you talked about the fact that you were clear. I think the quote was, you were clear you were building a business that everyone owns, everyone has a stake, and everyone can shape. And now, obviously, not all of that is literal. Some of that is metaphorical and cultural. But I'd be really interested actually how you've maintained that feel as you've joined a group, because obviously you are, to use a terrible metaphor, you're a village, you can put houses up where you want, but I'm sure there's now a planning committee that decides whether it has 2 windows or 1. So how have you struck that balance to become part of for your team, become part of the village while still feeling gate one and letting them feel and have an impact in the growth and direction of the business?
Yeah, and it's a really interesting one. I get that it probably sounds strange to say we can still stand behind a statement like that everyone has a stake in the business when we're no longer an independent entity. But I think, to what I was just saying, Havas interferes so little. It's all upside. They're a very supportive parent. They're there when we need more, there when we need to, change our strategy or seek turbocharged investment, to make big, bold bets. It's incredible to have a parent there, and if well reasoned, come from a point of view of yes, and at the same time we've been able to do all of the things that we were going to do anyway, and much more. So the ethos of the business is, I think, I mean, you need to talk to our team, Nick, to kind of test whether anything that Dave or I say holds water, but the ethos of finding talented people and liberating that talent, giving them an environment to flourish, an entrepreneurial environment to really make your mark, the ability to build and create something, with us that's still, so much of a blank piece of paper that people can shape. I very much like to think that is still absolutely the case, but now with an even more open-ended set of possibilities in terms of where our team can take their careers, and international and new skills and new collaborations and client projects on a much bigger scale. All of those things is all upside for them. And I can't honestly think of anything that our team would consider that they've had to give up for all of those benefits.
It's funny. So I've actually recently been working with Rue and Amber from your team, and they are complementary. So for anyone listening, it all sounds true from what I hear. And actually, you made a point there around letting people sort of take that blank piece of paper, build, for instance, new capabilities, new sectors. It's something you mentioned sort of at the start, and actually taking a bit of a tangent, but I think it'll illustrate some of that point. as a business, you've grown a lot in people terms, but you've also grown a lot of capabilities. You're growing more capabilities. David, you mentioned there with the sort of Havas piece. And I'd love to just, I guess, start with how has that growth happened? Where have you come from and gone to? And then maybe I'll hold it till after that. But I'd love to know, looking back, which was the easiest, which was the most challenging, and why for both of those?
Yeah, it's a good question, Nick. I mean, part of my role since we set up the company was to drive the propositions, and a lot of it comes down to the team and who you back, who you bring into the business, and Si mentioned sort of giving them that blank canvas to go out there and shape something from scratch. We started out with a relatively tight sort of offering, for those that aren't aware, it's operating models, change management, transformation strategy and leadership, and sort of digital transformation. That was the core of it. And it seemed to resonate well in the market. And as you grow, you tend to sort of branch out and you can add more depth to those things. Along comes, deeper customer experience. We had some great talent through the door. Data analytics was another one that came out. Product management, agile, the list goes on. Now we're sort of looking at sustainability and, trying to find the gate one approach into all of those offerings. I would say probably some of the hardest have been, trying to find the right people who can run genuine company-wide operating model transformations. That's not something you learn overnight. It takes years and years of experience, but also the right mindset. And, like a lot of organizations, finding the right people who really understand data, but are able to operate with a consulting mindset and have the EQ to go with it. Those are rare animals indeed. And, we have a core nucleus now, but it's taken quite a long time to build that particular capability, and all of those things are amplified actually with Havas. We found that all of our capabilities have been relevant with new combinations, and actually what it's done is probably pulled a lot more on things like customer experience and data, just because that's, essentially where Havas's clients are really interested, and, there's a lot of great work to be done there.
That point you made there, David, around finding the right people, I mean, that at its heart, I guess, of a services business, that becomes the number one challenge. And finding data skills and IQ and EQ is not always the easiest. And I'm intrigued on that. Take that practice, take one of the other sort of capability areas. How have you gone about building those? And the reason I ask is I see a lot of consulting firms who will enter a new market, but either sort of withdraw quickly or it sort of stagnates. It never reaches the same level as their core capabilities. How have you approached that to, I guess, give that person, that practice, that capability, the support to build that foundation, but also, I guess, for yourselves, make sure if you did hire the wrong person, they're not damaging the brand and the business by going off and, doing something completely different or alien to the values, the culture?
Yeah, I think you've got to take a few calculated risks. You don't progress unless you're constantly experimenting, and it's about giving people the backing. Each one of those is effectively a mini business within a business, and they get supported to put together a business plan, a go-to-market. They get introductions with existing clients. They get help with marketing, with recruitment, other things. So for a lot of people who have sort of come up through gate one and are now leading a number of our capabilities and propositions, they've all gone on their own mini startup within a startup journey. And, some of them take longer than others to sort of, hit product market fit and then fly. But more often than not, if you stick with it and you get the right talent behind it, great things sort of happen.
And to be completely honest, it hasn't worked out every time. And that's not to say we've made mistakes, with all best intentions and best endeavours. It just sometimes doesn't work. And we've had to part ways with some senior individuals who, we really would have backed to succeed, but it didn't quite happen for a combination of different reasons. So as Dave said, you've got to keep pushing the boundaries and therefore accept that sometimes it won't work and not be deterred to keep taking the risk.
And it might have just been very individual situations, but looking at those where they haven't worked, is there almost either criteria that when you look across the board they didn't meet? Were there certain things that, having seen one of these practice areas not work out, you put in place to make sure the others were successful? I'm really trying to understand, what are some of those key learnings, to your point, Simon, that then you were able to fix so that the next practice or the next capability really did fly?
I mean, the thing that sort of jumps to mind for me is, do they have the hunger to be almost an entrepreneur and start from scratch? I mean, they've got a great platform, but, we place a lot of emphasis on people wanting to go out and generate business development and their own opportunities. And, people, either stand up and deliver and, go outside their comfort zone and find that they can be brilliant business developers if they're going to lead new propositions, or it's not for them. And, I think that's probably the single greatest sort of factor, is whether they're going to make it happen in the marketplace or not. Of course, there's some other sort of things in the background about how you tweak and support them along the way. But if you're an entrepreneur, ultimately in a business trying to push the boundaries, going out and finding and building clients is number one.
Yeah, I think that's true. And we probably covered this last time, Nick, but this ethos of democratizing business development across our whole team at every level is so core to our DNA, and which is why we think we've created a really powerful engine around that, very, very sustainable one that takes away kind of dependence on a small group of seniors to kind of find the work and take the business forward, as you see in many other consultancies. By the same token, therefore, when we give these practice leads a platform, we do ask a lot of them, and it's a multifaceted role. They've got to build that business, and deliver the great work. And for some individuals, that's been the making of them, and it's really thrived. And for others, as Dave said, that's probably the element that's been the most, where it hasn't worked, that's probably been the leg of the stool that's fallen a bit short.
I wasn't going to go to the sort of COVID point, more just because I want these podcasts to endure. And, I don't know about yourselves, chaps, but I hope in a year we're no longer talking about COVID and we no longer have to wear masks, but wishful thinking. But actually, to your sort of that point there around democratizing the sort of business development, I'd love to actually just touch on something you said right back at the start, Simon, around the fact you lost a third of your order book. And just to bring this to life, almost, what did you do next, and how did that democratizing of business development, support you bouncing back from that? Because that's a huge amount of business to lose. I imagine it all came very quickly when COVID struck. How did your approach, help you to turn that round and get back to where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously with a lot of blood, sweat and tears, but you've kind of answered your own question there, Nick. Like, because of what we'd built that into the fabric of the team, and because I think we have this very transparent, open book sharing of, wherever company performance is at any given moment, that the team are aware. So likewise, when the chips were down in that sort of, I guess, spring period, 2020 was when things were most challenging, because it happened so suddenly. The team can grasp the scale of the challenge. Or, I mean, it was pretty surreal what was happening, but even given the magnitude of what was happening, that I'd like to think the team were quicker to grasp the scale of the challenge. And of course it was a lot of hard work, and of course a lot of the team were really going out of their comfort zone. Of course it was the first time many of our team had really faced into such challenging economic circumstances. You're talking existential moments when you have such a severe impact on your business. And it didn't happen overnight, but I think two things. The first thing was the results of that model, and everybody playing their part, eventually paid back. Sometimes we had some quick results. Sometimes it took a long time. We acquired new clients in a virtual world from scratch that we wouldn't have necessarily expected. Some phenomenal stories were emerging of people at all levels in our team, shaking out the black books, opening up opportunities and leads, and through gargantuan team effort, we did build it back, piece by piece, win by win, role by role, project by project, and you start to repair it incrementally. I think the other dimension that was massively beneficial to us, and back to the Havas model, it really accelerated our integration into the village model, partly by necessity, but also worked both ways. I mean, every agency in the village was feeling the pinch. We weren't alone by any means. So it really accelerated what would have happened anyway in terms of collaborating. And I guess it was lower hanging fruit in terms of looking for opportunities to cross refer work or to bring other agencies into our clients and vice versa. So it was a hugely positive experience. Firstly, it helped us to move into new clients quicker through our partners, but also it helped the learning process in terms of understanding the complementarity with what we do and our agencies. And I think it also, the role we played across the village as the sort of natural integrators that we are as consultants, that also took an evolutionary leap at the same time. So, a combination of different things, and serendipity always plays its part, as you know, in the business development game. And then we've been surprised that the seeds that were planted in that period have really served us now. We're growing in this period when we're still in lockdown much faster than we would have dared to expect.
Just on what you said there, Simon, about the honesty and transparency, and again, this might have been, it was much easier because everyone was in this situation. But how did you, as the leaders of the business, manage that? Because on one hand, telling the team, look, we're in the trenches, we're in this together, we need to go and find business, can be quite sort of, it can get people sort of rallied behind you and really excited. On the other side, if you don't message it right, it can get people, scared, fearing for their jobs and almost, applying for everywhere else. How did you approach that to get that balance right and get everyone, confident that we can get through this and pushing in the right direction, not, concerned and all the problems that can come with that?
I mean, I think we need the benefit of probably a lot more hindsight to, properly assess, what worked well and otherwise. But we did make a deliberate decision to be very open with the team very early on. And it did do all of those things. It caused anxiety. It caused fear, uncertainty. A lot of the team, would have been easy to have downplayed the gravity of the situation, as I'm sure other companies were taking, that angle on it. So it did feel really uncomfortable. The reason we did that early was, and we were very open with the team about this, we are choosing to take bigger decisions in terms of some cost control measures very early, so that it afforded us some optionality because the situation was so uncertain. And we took a lot of time to explain the rationale for that with the team. And we were clear that if the consequences of the situation aren't as grave as they could be, then, of course, everybody will benefit from that later. But rather, we all share the pain early so that we all have maximum optionality, and we don't need to make the very, very difficult decisions of, for example, letting people go or making salary cuts. We talked about the possibilities of having to do that or under what circumstances, but I'm really pleased to say we didn't have to invoke those things. And as I've said, it's all built back in a really positive way since. So I know that was uncomfortable for the team, and I guess we knew that would happen. I hope they understand why we did that, and they see that that strategy ultimately paid back for everybody.
I think I'd also add that, we created a working party that people were, self-appointed to, for them to see the data and for them to help us make the right decisions about, a series of increasingly unpalatable choices if it got to that point, for them to feel an active role in that, and for others across the business to see that there was people at all grades involved in that in a very open, transparent way was quite powerful as well. That just helped with the overall communication of things. And, I guess overall, it's interesting in those big points of adversity, that's when you really understand what kind of business you've got and what kind of culture. They really show the true colours. And, the only other time I can think like it was Brexit referendum and, the slide that happened there. And, Gate 1 is at its best when we're backs against the wall and you come out as a stronger business as a result of that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, David. Nick and I talked about that in the previous episode. When the team go through that period of adversity together, they dig deep together and they come out the other side as a stronger business. Like, the sense of power that gives to the team is incredible. And, God knows we're going to face more challenges and uncertainty in the next few years, but what can we not overcome together based on the collective experience that we've now had?
I think, Simon, that actually brings us quite nicely to the next few years and what that looks like for yourselves. I mean, I've got some questions on some of the elements, but I'd love to ask you two first. What are the plans for the next few years? What are the key things that you see sort of the business doing moving forward? And then I'll sort of see if any of my questions make sense off the back of that.
I mean, it's been fascinating to already be part of the Havas village in the last year and a half. It's opened up a completely new dimension for us, which we could never have hoped to do, on our own. And I think looking forward, genuinely, we feel like we barely scratched 5%. It's a really limitless sort of future for us at this stage. And we have an aspiration to be a global challenger consultancy, Nick. And, with Havas and the international ability and footprint that they have for us to expand and continue from where we are today, that's just a really great dimension as well. So, before I go on to that, I guess we'll also find quite quickly we'll break the magical 150 barrier as a firm, which is giving us quite a lot of thought about how we change our operating model to keep hold of the culture that we've got and nurture it through the next stage of growth, but still keep that sort of family feel about the firm. So we're really thoughtful about, that particular growth journey that we're about to go through.
Why you call it the magical barrier? So you've obviously done some thinking about this internally. I'm running a business of 9 people, so 10 is a magical barrier. What is it about 150 that's...
I'll defer to Si because he's done the more detailed research on 153, I think it is, isn't it, Si?
Yeah, I mean, obviously different experts think the number is, in different places, but broadly between the sort of 80 and 200 barrier, you're compelled to organize in different ways, think differently about how your business is structured, how you delegate, where decision making lies and those kind of things. So in our model, we've seen this hurdle of 150 approached us much quicker than we were expecting. So it doesn't really matter what the number is, but we've used that as the rallying cry because that's approaching really quickly. We know that the structures that have served us so well in this last evolution of the business will surely cause us challenges in the future unless we get ahead of that and start to think differently. So that's one of the intellectual debates that we're enjoying going through at the moment, which in our model is simultaneous with international expansion. So it's inevitable you're going to be challenged around what aspects of your model are consistent in different markets, where's their local tailoring and different flavors added in different parts of the world. So yeah, fascinating choices that we need to make very quickly that will hopefully serve as well to evolve to 250, 300, which is sort of the next evolutionary milestone we're looking towards.
I think it's a curse of having a whole load of operating model consultants, snooping around and looking at the business and deciding how to design it going forward. But yeah, it's certainly the next big challenge for us. And alongside that, and where we go internationally as well. So we've got, I guess, really strong growth in the UK now coming out the other side of COVID. But what's been interesting is sort of the move into other jurisdictions. Some of it has been a real pull from other parts of Havas who've seen what we've been doing in the UK. And so we've set up Gate 1 Paris. That's now maturing nicely. And that's Havas's HQ. And, those guys over there got a massive black book of clients. It's a really strong market for Havas, as you can imagine, Nick. And, the pull for our consulting services alongside their very mature offering over there is going great guns. And, I guess for us going forward, we've just launched in Dublin and, soon to be in New York as well. And it's just made a hell of a lot easier because Havas operate in, close to 100 countries. They've got the infrastructure, they've got the local villages, they've got the tax, they've got the legal, they've got all of the things that just hold you back from really expanding quite quickly into those different markets. So, international for us is a really big sort of aspect of the future, alongside playing much more with the different propositions and different creative agencies here in the UK as well.
And it's quite weird to find ourselves hearing Dave say that, it's a massive aspect for us now, because I'm sure if we'd have talked about it 3 years ago, Nick, that the conversation we would have had was actually the founders of Gate 1 don't have a burning passion to internationalize, as many consultancies do very successfully. That was never an explicit goal for us. We consciously decided not to do that at various points in the past. But now we're in a situation where through Havas we're being pulled internationally, building on the success of UK, which is seen to be a big success story, and they really buy into our ethos of organic growth, building Gate 1 as the piece in the Havas jigsaw, the consultancy piece globally. So what an opportunity that we're now actively pursuing. So massively exciting for us. But certainly, even at the point of moving into the deal with Havas, it wasn't even an explicit expectation. So just a sign of how quickly things evolve, and will be a massively exciting part of the next few years.
It does sound great. And yes, I think, Simon, the only move you were doing 3 years ago was Offices. I think you're just about grown out of the WeWork.
Out of the shoebox.
Going to North London was going to be quite a step. I'm interested, though, on that point around, David, you mentioned around the pull, because there are quite a few consulting firms who make that leap successfully, but there are an equal, if not, I'd say, more consulting firms who get quite big in their sort of core market and try and create outposts and struggle. They don't get that same traction. And that pull obviously is helping you. You mentioned sort of Paris is up and running, maturing. Is it very much just that you can plug into that network? You've got everything on site, you've got the black books you said. Is that the thing that's made it the sort of secret sauce that maybe some other firms haven't quite had? They've started from scratch and that's made it infinitely harder.
Yeah, I mean, it's still difficult to set up the right local gate one operations. And there's lots of live debates about how much is it consistent with the mothership, how much is it independent, and where do those red lines sort of get drawn? But I think for us, the hardest part about international is making sure we've got the right talent to go out there and lead it, or find the local market talent to head it up, and make sure that it is consistent with the Gate One promise and, how we deliver with clients and the values. The rest of it, in terms of the infrastructure, is really, really straightforward because they already have it set up. They're very used to agencies growing from one jurisdiction to another. It's incredibly well-oiled machine from that point of view. And, before we've moved into any of these jurisdictions, the other big barrier, if you've got the talent bit sorted, well, then have you got the demand? And we're sort of seeing that we're actually servicing some of those countries from the UK first, and then seeing that there is this pipeline that would give us confidence that if we land local teams, we know we can really sort of fly from there. So we know where the big markets are for Havas, and we're just focusing on the ones that are, I guess, closest to us at the moment. And they've just been great to allow us to do that, really. So long may that continue.
And it's a huge accelerator to have the infrastructure there, and then more importantly, every village has its own client network there. So to the democratized business development point, we absolutely need to be winning work independently, but to have a client base there, you're on the supplier frameworks, you've got a network of like-minded people in each respective village, and the legal entities they're in place is massive. It's not easy to do the talent piece, as Dave said, so that is definitely the key challenge for us. But to have those two other components, a huge leg up, gives us a massive advantage.
And I'm going to ask this question. I think you answered it, Dave, but I want to ask it in case there is anything else of actually the selection point, because you mentioned Havas is in 100 countries. You could send one person to each and put lots of offices on the website. But I appreciate you're taking more of a sort of thought through approach. You talk there around you're going to the ones nearest to you. How have you selected where you've gone in the order? Is it simply geographical? Where's the closest flight from Heathrow? Is it where you've seen the most demand from? Is it the talent? Is it a combination? If it is just those three, we can move on. But I'd love to know sort of how you've structured that.
Yeah, it's a good question. There's an obvious set of international markets as a UK consulting firm that you might want to move into over time. Typically English speaking, typically sort of Western countries, so the US is an obvious choice. Actually, Ireland was obvious for us because we had the talent that we wanted to set up and lead that particular area. So sometimes it is very talent driven. Sometimes it's the market opportunity. Sometimes it's just the pull. I don't think we envisaged that our first international foray was going to be in Paris, but given our parent is over there and there was this real drive from there, that wasn't without risk from our perspective to move to a completely different country, culture, language, all the rest of it. But, there's been a real strong push and it's worked out incredibly well, more surpassed our expectations at this early stage, actually. So, when you look at other countries around the map, Australia, Singapore, others like that, we're quite thoughtful, but each one, you need to still treat on a case-by-case basis, but there could be a steady pipeline, down the road of international.
I think that is probably a good chance for us to turn to something that we've talked a lot about today, but we've we've deliberately left for this section, and that is actually the acquisition itself. And I think of all of the guests I've spoken to for the show, I've spoken to a number of people who have sold their consulting firms or sort of joined a group. But a lot of those people have done it a few years ago. I think the thing that really strikes me with yourselves is you've literally just done this. So I'd love to, for my listeners, really dig into as much as you can and are willing to share. And I appreciate some of this may be confidential. So just stop or put a hand up at any point and we can move on. But maybe to start off that chapter, I'd love to just understand, how did you decide it was time to go and sell? Was it Havas came knocking? Was it actually you decided to do more of a formal sort of exercise to see who's out there? What was it that made you decide let's have a look at this?
Yeah, that is a good place to start. And I think the question within the question there is, can you decide when to sell? How much is it up to you? And answer, of course you can make a decision when to set your stall out, but as we now know from having gone through a very, very complicated process, there's many things that you're not in control of. So throughout any of this, it's a risky game to set your expectations too firmly to any particular date or type of acquisition, or certainly type of company that you want to acquire. But on our side, I think we've always held open the possibility it's something that we may do, and we wanted to be really clear why that was. So in our case, there had to be something that was additive to the mission and an additive to what we could do for our clients. So it certainly wasn't just for the sake of selling the business. And then when you start to educate yourself on how these things work, and we were certainly amateurs when we went into the process, there are kind of natural windows, in terms of the maturity of your business that you need to be targeting for your business to be attractive to potential suitors. So regardless of when you might personally want to make something happen, the timing has to be right the other way as well. I think in our case, I do remember a very specific moment. I think it was when we came together at the start of 2019. I remember Tim, our managing partner, sort of sat us all down, and we'd come through a fairly traumatic experience that David alluded to, sort of navigating a post-referendum period. We'd had a fantastic sort of strategy reset, and sort of Tim sat us down and was like, I think we need to be, it's kind of now or never. And we were all taken aback initially because it's probably sooner than we were expecting, having not been able to allow ourselves to think about it for so long. But his rationale was really clear. We're in one of those windows in terms of when we thought the business might be attractive to start some interesting conversations. The market conditions in terms of consultancies at the time was very favorable. That's what all the data was telling us. And I think critically, we knew at the end of 2019 that Brexit would be a reality. Remember we used to talk about Brexit all the time. Feels weird. We knew post 2019 Brexit would be a reality, and who knew what that would do to the market conditions. It may not have caused things to move in an adverse direction, but certainly the uncertainty would increase significantly. So we did make a conscious decision at the start of 2019 that we would instigate a process and then be open-minded as to where that journey took us. We thought, with a fair wind, if something was going to happen, probably within a 6 to 9 month window. In our case, it took the 12 months, and we ended up entering into the deal at Christmas at the end of that year. So it was deliberate, but it took many twists and turns along the way.
Well, and very fortunate timing given the year that's just happened, and particularly for anyone who's where you were in the journey or a year or two before. You mentioned, it sounds like you did a lot of research on this and you've now been through it yourselves. You mentioned there around like there's certain windows for firms of your size. What was it? Was it the environmental conditions? Was it something around the size of your business? I'm really interested. What was that window?
I mean, it's a fairly boring answer. I mean, it's sad to say it's largely based on profitability. So in our case, there is kind of one of those windows. The market kind of lazily perceives one of those windows is when your profit is sort of 2 to 2.5 mil in terms of EBIT, then you're in a certain scale that you're a meaningful addition to whatever the nature of the acquisition is, but still with a huge amount of growth potential or leverage potential. So that was part of our rationale.
Yeah, you need to get on board a good set of advisors that will tell you some of that feedback and when you've hit the sweet spot for the market that you're looking at. And we certainly had that advice, I think even 12 months before that. And actually it was really sound advice, which was just, no, go away, keep going, build the business, keep building some of the fundamentals in X, Y, and Z, as well as some of the revenue and profit growth. And we'll talk again in 12, 18 months. And that was probably the single biggest advice we could have had.
And is that where sort of Tim's statement, I appreciate it might have just been provocative for the meeting, but that sort of now or never came from? Was it that window closed at a certain point and the next one was too far away, or you didn't want to get to that next one, or didn't think you'd get there within the time frame you wanted? What was it? Advice that told you it was now or never? Was it a gut feeling? What
I think
was
it
that?
was. I think it was dramatic statement as you said. It was, and we were open minded as to whether this was ever something we were going to do. So it wasn't, we didn't see it as a negative if something didn't happen in that time period, but it was more, let's take this on and see what possibilities open up for us. And if the right thing is there, now is a good time to do it. And if the right thing is not there, no problem. But who knows when that window will open up again, because, significantly increased uncertainty if we perceived if we hadn't hit that 2019, and as you say, who knows? I mean, there's every chance, nothing would ever have happened if we hadn't done it then. So, fortune favours the brave, as they say. But just to reiterate, it wasn't we certainly didn't go into 2019 going, come what may, we will enter into a deal with somebody this year, before Brexit. Absolutely not. We thought worst case scenario, whilst we knew we were taking a huge additional undertaking, worst case scenario, we would significantly educate ourselves, potentially for future benefit.
So I've got two questions, and I'm going to ask a little bit of both because I feel they're chicken and egg. So I'll let you guys tell me which one comes first. David, earlier you mentioned how you've been very sort of selectful and mindful in joining Havas, and you presumably you talked about other marketing groups. I'm going to infer you talked to a few. You've also talked about the fact that you had advisors, and I'm keen to dig into that side as well. I guess what I'm interested to find out is, did you decide the type of parent you wanted and then went out, got advisors to find that? Or did you start with advisors? Because I then want to go in the right order to explain how this process worked and would work for someone else.
It's a really good question. I think we went advisors first, and we were new to the whole process about tying up the firm with a parent, and I think it would be naive to think that we knew the kind of parent that we actually wanted at that early stage. So getting on board the right advisors was absolutely critical for us. And, Livingston, who turned out to be our providers, we can't sort of recommend them highly enough. But that really started off a process for us, Nick, which was looking at a whole number of industries that we might like to potentially be part of, looking at individual organizations within those different industry verticals. And I'm talking about a huge range on here. We cast the net deliberately wide to be open-minded about what would come through and what were the possibilities. And, Livingston worked with us along with our lawyers and others to really cast the net quite wide, because we wanted to educate ourselves on a whole load of different possibilities, and then slowly over a period narrow it down into, not just the type of industry that we wanted to join, but also the individual organization within there. So from that perspective, the beauty parade started very, very broad indeed, and then, whittled down over a period of, many months, very skillfully done with Livingston, by our side.
I'll start there then with advisors. And actually, before, you mentioned there, you had Livingston, you had lawyers, you had others. Again, I asked this almost naively, how did you start that process? If you think of that as a team, like how did you even know what players you need on that team? And then how did you select them? Because, it's a very crude analogy, but if you're selling a house, there's 10 estate agents on the road, you can see them, you can speak to people about them. When you're selling a consulting business, it's not like there's a for sale sign and you sort of go knock on doors. How did you even start with knowing who to have on that team and then actually going through the process of selecting them to make sure they were the right fit for you in that journey?
Yeah, it's something that, Tim, our MD, took on and did a phenomenal job with, actually. And a lot of it involved talking to previous owners who'd gone through the process, recommendations that they had. But I think, appointing the right sales side advisor for us, it was a vendor selection of a partnership selection process in its own right, that we ran a number of different, providers. We understood their offerings. We got them to come in. We got them to, really be clear on who were the specific individuals from their team that would be working with us. We actually got them to go and meet the lawyers that we had appointed, because they would need to be working closely together. So there was a really rigorous process, actually. And, I'd encourage anybody who's thinking about this in their future consulting sale to really put the rigor behind finding the right partners for you. And there's a lot of things to trade off around, what their fees are, what they can offer, what some of the value add is, what's their track record within your particular given industry, what's their particular slant on the sale, and what's their immediate black book, who can you go and talk to that they've worked with before. There's a lot of due diligence that putting it in at the early stages, I think, really paid back later. And the team that we assembled around us, there's no way we would have done it without them. And, I think the first thing is to recognize you need the help and that you can't do it on your own. All of them are massively wise investments to go after in given you're facing such an uncertain process.
And in truth, it was quite a fine call in our case. So, Livingston were phenomenal, as Dave says, but we met many top-notch organizations, and probably we did a beauty parade of 6 different organizations, Dave, and they were all impressive. And in truth, we probably could have gone with any one of 3. We didn't feel there was clear blue water between any of them. So there are many good advisors out there from our experience, but we never regretted the choice we made. The team we found through the process we ran, and I guess part by serendipity, were phenomenal.
You said there were 3 sort of close, and I'm not going to ask you to name who they were, but I'd love to find out what was it that sort of tripped that decision. And the reason I asked that in part is, if you're new to this process, how do you know what good looks like? So how did you get to 3, and then what was it that the other 2 just fell at that last hurdle that meant Livingston? What was it they did and sort of showed you that really made them the front runner?
I mean, from my perspective, so I might have a different view on this. I think the clincher comes down to, final chemistry. There's a lot that you place your trust in, that they understand you enough to represent you in the marketplace and advise you in the right way, and understand implicitly what you're trying to drive out of a deal beyond any, straightforward things like commercials and other things like that. For me, that was the overriding deciding factor when you line up and you eyeball the team that's going to be working with you, on probably one of the most important decisions you're going to make as a founder. That trust and that chemistry is the clincher for me. Yeah,
definitely. And that probably, it didn't boil down to one thing, but that probably was the most important single factor. In our case, we made it conditional on appointing them that Jeremy Furness, who was the senior partner that led their pitch to us, had a very key role in the team, and that every member of the Livingston team was excellent. But we were very assured by the fact that we knew Jeremy himself was going to stay really close to it, and he was true to his word. So that wasn't a commitment that all of them were prepared to make.
And I think there's actually a really key point in there, to that, I guess, that being very sort of deliberate about that. And I guess also having the confidence to demand that. I mean, that may sound strange given you've done it, but there's quite a big thing to ask that question. Obviously, you're putting your faith in them, but actually to demand that person, that team, that feels like quite a big. So was that just always a no-brainer for yourselves? Did that just come out as you went through the process? Just because I think, talking myself personally, sometimes you'd be very British about it and might not want to ask that question.
Yeah, you're right. Don't ask, don't get. I mean, and our clients ask us that question often, right? Maybe not me, but Dave. If Dave's leading a pitch, the client will often say, love the pitch, but Dave needs to be a key part of this. So, I'd always advocate that. What's the point? Trying to transmit that buying atmosphere by pitching if you're not prepared to follow through and be part of the delivery team. So, definitely ask, and ultimately they want the work, and they genuinely wanted to work with us, or they wouldn't have put a really competitive proposal together. So I don't even think they did it reluctantly. It was actually quite an easy give on their part.
Yeah, I think your only job as a founder at that stage of the sales process is to assemble the best possible team of talented individuals. So don't be shy and hold back in, making that happen. And it's nice to be a client for once, actually, and be a bit demanding.
Yeah, it's nice to be the other side of the beauty parade.
I want to then come on to we said there was two parts to this. One was selecting the team. The other was playing the game, for want of a metaphor. I'd love to then go on to that, because we talked, as I say, about this being quite a deliberate selection. So obviously you talked at the start, actually you were pretty broad. You didn't know, you were looking at all options, but you obviously came quite quickly down to a sort of narrowing of what you wanted. I'd love to understand how that process worked and how you got to the point where you knew you were looking for a parent business like Havas.
I think there's two parts to that, Nick. One, the whole process is fascinating, and if you haven't ever been part of it, which I hadn't going into it, it's massively eye-opening. Every potential tie-up partner that you meet, you learn new things about your firm, about the things that you do like, about the things that you don't like. So, even all of the potential suitors that were ultimately a no gets you closer to a yes, and you start to become clearer about what you value. But underlying all of that, was really a strong sort of understanding across all of us about, while we all had slightly different personal ambitions and, family situations and all the rest of it, the core of what we were looking for and the red lines that we had, we were really key on those and really clear. I think Sai touched on it a little bit earlier, that independence was really important to us. Having built a firm that had a unique culture, had its brand, being able to be in charge of our own destiny, that was really important, that we weren't going to join, potential suitor that would ultimately squash that or integrate us into the mothership. And, we'd end up losing a lot of our team accordingly. And having that ability to, be still clear on our mission, still deliver meaningful change, still work on the things that we wanted to, and move into different areas of growth. That was key for us, and we didn't want to lose that. And actually, an organization that could help us amplify it, could push us in new, exciting, directions is brilliant. And I guess that was the third thing is, this wasn't just finding a home for Gate One. This is trying to find a space where you could put opportunities together. That whole notion of 2 and 2 equals 6, was really important to us. We didn't just want a partner that was going to amplify a journey we were already on. We wanted a partner that was going to take us in, completely new paths. And so it was a really big shopping list when you sort of step back. But those were ultimately the red lines, not just for us as a set of founders, but if we were going to turn out in front of the firm, and all of our people and say, hey, look, here's your new partner, we had to make damn sure that was something that they would feel excited about as much as we would. Otherwise, what's the point, really? So there was a lot of sort of soul searching when you get close to those things, but when you scratch the surface and you see, potential organizations that could offer elements of it, but not all of it, I don't think we were in a position where, we were prepared to make those trade-offs. And I think that's the ultimate point on this. And Si mentioned it. We were prepared to go through a process, but we weren't prepared to do a deal at any cost. And, you have to be ultimately ready to just walk away if you don't find the right suitor. And for all of the best laid plans, ultimately it comes down to luck, that there is the suitor, the other side, that is right for you and you're right for them, and they're in a buying mood at the right time. And ultimately for us that worked out. But had it not been, we could have quite easily walked away, and that would have been the right decision too.
Those red lines obviously sound like they helped you in selecting that sort of suitor and parent. But I'd love to understand, actually in the sort of day-to-day, there's 4 of you. So I can understand, with one of you, it's quite an easy decision to make. This suits me, it doesn't suit me. You mentioned, all got different family situations, personal lives. Actually, was there ever a time that was tested, and particularly sort of keen to understand how you overcame that as a group? Because you can say you've got red lines, and then suddenly someone offers you a big check, and one of you wants to do something, one of you wants to do another thing, and this is just people at large. Were there ever any of those sort of difficult conversations, and how did you as a group sort of come together to sort of overcome that?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, the best deal is not necessarily the most commercially attractive, and that's actually something that intrinsically people might not get when you get into thinking about all of the different other aspects to a deal. And of course, we all came from, different personal sort of perspectives on it. actually there was quite a lot of commonality, but there took quite a few sessions over beers to just sort of have the full and frank conversations about where each person was coming from personally, what their own aspirations are, because essentially what you're doing is looking each other in the eye and saying, you're in for at least another 3+, 4+ years, and is everybody on board with that, personally, professionally, family wise, and getting things out on the table. And there were a few particular things within there about what people wanted to do and how long, but ultimately really strong alignment to those red lines. And I don't think you can go into a process as a set of founders and leaders without having those full and frank conversations to just know where not just the company red lines are, but any personal ones are. Because, ultimately life's too short. And if somebody goes in either vetoing it at the last minute or kicking and screaming, then at the worst possible scenario, the whole stack of cards falls down.
Yeah, and I have to give Tim a huge amount of credit in terms of trying to get out ahead of that with all of us, with the five of us, and understand where everyone's personal preferences were and personal red lines were before we went into it. But ultimately, we were clear with each other that besides those, the 3 red lines that Dave talked through, the genuine red lines, everybody would probably have to compromise somewhere along the line, and we were open about that too. And then beyond that, Tim making the judgment call about, because we obviously couldn't all be in every conversation, when you're setting off so many different hairs running at once, bringing us all in at the right time, or different couplets or subgroups of the 5 of us in for different conversations, and trying to hang it all together with some semblance of coherence through what's inevitably quite an undulating road. He did really deftly, and ultimately there wasn't honestly anything that I don't think any individual had to make a really big personal compromise on, but there were definitely some things that weren't perfect, but there never will be, certainly when you're trying to juggle 5 different people and a parent who also has, understandably has, their own agenda in terms of what they want out of it.
Another side of this, and I know from other founders I've spoken to in terms of the process, is just simply the workload. Again, you hear about the sort of end of a deal and everything that comes with that. But actually the due diligence that goes into it, the documentation, you will have a much better of idea of what goes into it than I will. But how did you sort of teed it up there, Simon, around, actually, I guess, delegating some of these meetings to individuals? How did you as a founding team stop this becoming just a huge part of, I guess as a distraction, stopping you running the business and having you spend hours and days finding contracts and reports and on and on?
I mean, I'll take that one. I mean, Si's mentioned the work that Tim put into it. Actually, we knew from the beginning that it was going to be a massive endeavour for us, and it was going to be all consuming. Actually, Mark, who's our finance director, supported really well by Kirsty, who is in our finance team, our finance manager, and Tim shouldered a huge amount of the heavy lifting. And there is an enormous amount of work, as you've alluded to, Nick, to get the information memorandum in place, to deal with lots of due diligence and all of the questions that go with it. But they all did a really great job of making sure that we were in the meetings that mattered, the key meetings with potential suitors, the key decision points, the key strategizing meetings with Livingston. At no point did anybody feel left out of the process from a founder point of view. And it's really important, actually, because you can spend so much of your time just focusing on the deal, and then you lose your eye on the business, and things start to slide. And I think one of the things that worked really well was just being really clear. Okay, it's a massive project, but there's these people working on it, and everybody else's job is to keep things going and keep driving forward and make sure we've got a stable, strong business with the foundations. And a tricky balancing act, but those guys were the real heroes through that particular part of it. And the other kind of challenge in all of that process is, because it's necessarily in those early stages, it's highly sensitive. It really grated with our general sort of ethos about sharing and transparency with the broader team, and in those early days, due to NDAs and other things like that, you just can't share as much as you want, even with that extended leadership team. So as soon as we could, and probably much earlier than most other organizations typically do with any M&A, we were out to our leadership team to get soundings for them. We were out to, the broader team as and when we could announce, which is really important too.
I do want to come on to that, but to hold on your point around what Mark, Kirsty and Tim did, this may sound like a sort of obvious question now having been through it, but looking back, and again, for anyone who might want to go through this process, next year, 2 years, 10 years, was there anything that you had set up in the business or done that made that due diligence process really easy? And conversely, was there anything that, made it really laborious and time consuming? I'm thinking, was there a way you had done your contracts that meant you could just give them over? Or conversely, was there something where you thought, oh, bloody hell, I've got to go back through, my box in my loft and find that file?
I mean, it's one thing that Tim, Mark, many people across the team in operations and elsewhere have set up and run an incredibly tight ship, in terms of all of the contracts were in place, employment contracts were in place, any third parties are sorted. We implemented a professional services automation right at the beginning of the firm, within the first year, that gave us a load of huge MI, which, information memorandums were, meaty documents anyway. This thing was a monster because Mark and the team were able to add so much more depth. And what that does is it gives buyers confidence. And it means that they're not going to find a whole load of skeletons in the due diligence process. And it was an incredibly clean process as a result of that. I mean, there's still a lot to go through and a lot of back and forth. But, the way that the business has been set up and run from year dot just made that a hell of a lot easier.
Yeah, I don't want to make out that it isn't intense and laborious. Like in our experience of one deal, it is just an absolute mountain to work through. You've never answered all of the questions. But you're certainly asking for a world more pain if you're not running a tight ship in the first place. So I know our lawyers said it was the cleanest business they'd ever looked at, so the easiest from their perspective. But
they probably say that to everyone, don't they?
yeah, they do.
Is that when you ask for a discount on your fees because it was so easy for them?
Exactly. Yeah.
And Dave, you mentioned around sort of the team angle, and obviously we talked earlier about how actually the integration part has gone really well, and your team are sort of working well with the other agencies in the village. That early phase when you were announcing the deal to the team, it's a topic you don't hear a lot about. People talk to the founders, you hear the founder story, you don't hear a lot about that team impact and the culture obviously you're building and is very close knit. Actually, how did you approach that? A bit almost like we talked about earlier with COVID, and if it's the same answer, we can move on quickly. But how did you approach that again so that everyone understood what was happening and saw the benefits, not the concerns or challenges, culture's going to change, etc. How did you approach that as a team?
I think the timing of when to expand that circle of trust is it's such a finely balanced judgment call, and you want it to be late enough in the process that it's relatively certain that something is going to come to fruition, but not so late that the audience for that, in our case, in the first instance, our extended leadership team just feel it's some empty tokenistic gesture, when it's actually a fait accompli or already. So we definitely engineered some deliberate moments with that group. I remember one was when we'd sort of down to a notional shortlist which still had a couple of quite divergent paths actually in it, but I think it was the stage where we had serious offers on the table, and we felt as an owner group that it was likely we would go with one of them. They're credible enough. They passed, our key tests. So it was more likely than not, that something would come to fruition. And that was a really interesting conversation. And we genuinely were quite heavily swayed by the feedback of that group at that moment, in terms of certainly closing off some of those avenues as a direct result of those conversations. Then pretty much the next moment was, yes, this is going to happen. In terms of the wider team, I think you don't really have any other option but not to share the news until it's news. And obviously we're concerned about hairs running, but confidentiality is a big thing. So, as Dave said, it was slightly countercultural for us because, we are so open with the team and transparent about how we run the business. But for that instance, and until it's a done deal, you can't say anything. So we knew we wouldn't be telling the team until there was wet ink on the page. But that in itself was quite a bit of a funny story, because we So Christmas 19, it had come together almost perfectly, or we thought perfectly, that I think we were due to sign on the Thursday evening before we had the full team coming to our Christmas event, the Gateway as we call it, on the Friday. So we had a venue booked to run our event, and I don't think even the team probably don't know this, but the plan was that literally halfway through the day, Tim would get on stage, he'd announce, this momentous, development, and then we'd decant the team from whichever venue we're in central London over to the Havas office. We're going to wheel out some of the, our oppos from Havas and talk about it, show people, the wow factor of HKX. And, we really felt that was the best way to communicate what this was all about, by being in situ. And so we'd woven that into the day. We had the buses, literally parked in, somewhere in central London waiting for the team. But in the end, that last straight of getting the deal done, there were so many sort of last minute complexities, questions, and it was minutiae of the minutiae. But, lawyers being lawyers, it just ended up being so protracted. So with some sort of furious ad-libbing from the organising team, who just ended up running the day in the original venue, we weren't in the end able to do that. And we ended up actually signing the papers later that evening in the margins of our Christmas party. So I seem to remember Dave was half cut at the time. He probably could have been signing anything. So we ended up actually having to communicate to the team in a telecon on the following Monday, which was just, fairly major anticlimax from what we'd intended to do. But to go back to your question, I think if the essence of the rationale, those three, critical factors, independence, mission integrity, 2 + 2 = 6, we still with the same authenticity to those objectives. Obviously the channel was a bit underwhelming, but I hope it landed with the team, and then we were able to bring them to the village, I think later in the week, and we stood up a bespoke event so they could really see it and feel it in a bit more tangibly. But there's nothing you can do that doesn't make that quite a seismic moment. But at the same time, if you do it in a way that's consistent with your culture and your values, then that's the way to make it the smoothest it can possibly be. Obviously, if your culture isn't like that, it's harder to land the rationale in the same authentic way.
I really like that, and I think that point around actually having people feel it viscerally, come to the office. It is a cool office, but having people feel and get to know the company they're joining, because I think, as we know as consultants, so often it's perceived problems. What are they going to be like on that side? Whereas if you're all together, I guess you dispel that quite quickly. You probably had everyone going off to Christmas quite excited about the new office. It's a little bit better than a WeWork, chaps. No offense to the WeWork.
But it's also recognizing as well that, even though there's lots of exciting things about it, for a lot of people it's massively unsettling. And I think just even standing up and acknowledging that some people are just, already there mentally, really happy about it. Others need to take a lot more time to digest and process it. Follow-up conversations, making sure people really understood the rationale, quelling any sort of rumour mill about what it would be, what it wouldn't be. It's still a big fundamental change for people, even if, the office was better. So, whilst there were quite a lot of people who were, straight on, really up for it, others were naturally more reflective, and it's just allowing that to take its course as well.
Well, I think, Chuck, we've covered a tremendous amount of ground today, and when we started and we were talking about all the things you've done in the last 3 years, I wasn't sure how much we'd get in, but I think we've covered so much of it. And actually, probably one last question, and again, tell me how much or little you can or can't talk about this before we go on to sort of, my wrap-ups that I ask all guests, is really about yourselves and what's next for you. I think something that has always sort of interested me about your model, I know you're not unique, is that you set up as a limited company, not a partnership. And again, having, my consulting days, I worked at a partnership, so I saw leadership transition. New partners joined, sort of more senior partners retired, and that kept the firm going. Not knowing how that works in a model like yourselves, or where you've now joined a group, actually, how are you approaching that leadership transition? You're going to have to bring more people in to run the business as you grow, as you get past the magic 150. How are you approaching that next phase of both the new leaders coming in, and also how is your role changing as that happens?
Yeah, it's one of the most important dynamics that we're managing through at the moment. And even since we've moved into Havas, the leadership team has grown quite significantly, including the partnership team. So a number of the partner group are now sort of promotions from our team, so directors who have come through, and we're actively trying to build the leaders of that leadership team as we grow and find GMs for new markets. So incentives are massively aligned in terms of our desire to build that leadership team and our team's desire to hopefully to progress upwards. So some of that will be easier, some of it will be harder. I think the notion of our roles and moving from founders or owners to leaders of the business or consulting partners has been interesting. And the whole notion of founders and owners is just not really important now. Much less important if it ever was. So the way we very much think about our roles now is sort of stewards of this business, what we think is quite a special business, moving into a space that's, really unique in the consulting market. It's a real privilege. And however long, we stay involved, our role is really to keep building a model that is sustainable, to grow and evolve and become something, much more exciting, way beyond, our involvement. But personally, really invigorated by the possibilities for myself and for colleagues and leadership team in this new world that we've moved into, even since the acquisition. So it's very much not playing out for time. It's very much, what next?
Yeah, I think, it's personally put on a completely different tangent to my career, having joined VAS and working with all the agencies and where it goes next. It's a really exciting time. But as Si mentioned, it all starts and ends with building more leaders in the business, and that just gives you options. And whenever people decide to go their separate ways, if you've got that core strong leadership team that's ever growing here and internationally, then the business will survive and thrive going forward, whoever's driving it at the top.
I think one point that we've always been really explicit and clear about with the team is growth. That is a very explicit objective for us, not for profit, not for for revenue, but that is the way that we all as individuals keep growing. We create new opportunities for growth. Now, very tangibly international opportunities, and we've talked about platforms for building out new services and capabilities. So when growth is there, it's easy to find incentives for everybody to share in those rewards. People get hung up on what the mechanism is. Is it equity? Is it profit share? Whatever it does, that matters far less than if the organism is growing in a really healthy way, then the rewards are there for everybody. But it's a notion that it takes the team a while to kind of engage with and be comfortable with. Why can't we stay kind of as we were? I like knowing everybody in this kind of small team. Maybe I don't want to grow, but that's been something that we've been very explicit about.
It's that human nature, isn't it? There's an intrinsic fear of any change, and if you're not a consultancy that's growing, then you're not giving growth opportunities to individuals. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but a consultancy that isn't growing is one that's probably got more of an up or out policy as well. And, when you start to unpick that with people, that, they go, okay, yeah, no, that is a good thing that we're getting more people in and I've got more opportunities to learn from others. And, it just creates a different mindset, and one that isn't, focused on this is my turf, this is somebody else's turf. There's a bit more of a sort of endless possibility to that. And that is, true at a firm level as much as it is at an individual level.
Yeah, I think it's a really key point, both. And I'm someone with a lot more knowledge than me once said, either you're going forward or you're going backwards. Actually, the sort of notion of standing still, to that point, even the sort of up and out culture, you've got to grow or you're shrinking, and you can't have this sort of hallowed standing still, everything's perfect. And like you say, growth means you've got more roles, more people. This brings us nicely onto my last questions, and I love a good segue. And that growth mindset is something that I know, Simon, you're a big believer in, and we talked a lot about last time with books. And so really, these are my last two questions. Simon, you've already answered them. And so I think the first one is about books. From our last interview, you turned me on to Seth Godin. Since then, I now actually give all of our clients This Is Marketing, which I don't know if you've read, is sort of his latest but one book, which is fantastic. You got me onto the Icarus Deception. So if I've taken either of your two, sorry. But I'd love to ask both of you, maybe we'll start with you, Dave, because you've not been on the show before. What is the book that you find yourself giving or gifting to people most often, and why?
This is the point where I meant to come up with something quite intellectual and profound. And I'm not going to, actually, because the book for me, it was given to me by an advisor that we have. And it's called Procrastinate on Purpose by Rory Vader. And it's an incredibly cheesy American book, but once you look beyond the veneer of it, it's got hugely practical insights and advice about how to just manage your competing time, as a founder, as someone, trying to have a family life, trying to do your fitness, your leisure, your pursuits. And, it's not about efficiency, it's about effectiveness. And there's just some really interesting and practical techniques that I still go back to time and time again. Actually another interesting part of it is, as a founder, one of the challenges is, how do you just delegate? How do you let go? How do you be comfortable with the imperfect and letting others take on things, which is something that a lot of us as founders and others find difficult to do. There's just stacks full of practical tips. And I probably read it about 7 years ago, and I still go back to it now. So that was my one read for today.
Fantastic. It's not a book I've come across, so thank you. When sort of the build-up, I wasn't sure what it was going to be, or it was going to be a sort of kid's story book, or
that's for the next interview.
and so I've given you time to think there, because I'm sure I stole some of yours. Since our last chat, what's the book that's really struck you, or you found yourself giving to the team or friends?
Yeah, tough one. I'd love to say I've been as well read in the last few years as before, but I think a lot of non-fiction's gone out the window in the pandemic for me. It's been purely about fiction and escapism. But a couple. I think last show I mentioned Simon Sinek's been a big influencer on us. Start With Why was a book that we used as a seminal text at the beginning of our journey. It's been really interesting. One of his latest books, The Infinite Game, is a superb read. The Infinite Game is a notion that we latched onto early in our journey. So it was very satisfying to see Simon Sinek latch onto that concept and put a really great read around that. So that does encapsulate a lot of what we're trying to do in terms of creating open-ended possibilities. We're here to serve, to make our profession better. And if others raise their game because of us, everybody wins. They're very much a kind of core part of our philosophy. That's definitely a very seminal read. And I'll probably throw the This Is Marketing book back at you, Nick. I think you gifted it to me. Thank you. You may or may not have come to the same realization yourself, but I think that is the book that for me most encapsulates this whole proposition that we're now into, this overlap of marketing and consultancy, and in the pursuit of finding excellence for customers and serving their unmet needs. A brilliant read, but it actually does point the way to exactly what we're trying to encapsulate in this new model that we've entered into. So very prescient, Nick, when you got that for me, and that is a superb book from a very good writer.
Fantastic. Some great recommendations. I'm glad it's had such an impact, and I'm sure one the team will all be reading now. And you're right. So it's. As a book, it boils down what can sometimes feel quite complex into a really simple, positioning, and actually solving, ultimately any business, solving your clients' needs, finding those new solutions. And, if that is through consulting, if it's through marketing, if it's through a combination of both, that's what business is about, be it professional services, be it, as he talks about in the book, sort of drill bits, it's finding that need, understanding what your customer wants and giving it to them. So I think some great recommendations both. And then the very last question, and again, this is one I've changed slightly because this is a round two, so I'm only going to ask you for one piece of advice, as Sino's last time I was cheeky and asked for three, is for anyone listening to this who is in that position you were in 2019, they're growing a consulting firm, they see that window coming, what one piece of advice would you give to help them make that sale a success for them, for their team, for their business as a whole?
I mean, from my point of view, Nick, it is probably the single biggest decision you'll make as a founder, when and who to, join. So educate yourself and surround yourself with the right team is my main sort of piece of advice, particularly if it's an alien world to you, which it was to us. Having that team and going out and talking to as many people as possible about the process and what you need to do well before the journey starts is critical. And then there is a second one for me, which is, you need to be really clear on your red lines and why you're going into it, and ultimately be prepared to walk away if it isn't the right one, because at some point you're going to be standing up in front of your entire team and you need to be 100% confident it's the right thing for you and for them.
Yeah, I just echo that. The why question is the most important. And I think if you're a founder running what's likely to be a successful consultancy, if you're contemplating seeking a sale point, chances are you're doing what you love, and you're building a business in the thing you're best at. So there has to be a really compelling reason beyond financial as to why you would seek to alter that path in the future. So for us, it's got to be something that helps you to really deliver against your burning mission, better or faster, or in some way serve your customers in a profoundly different way. But if you can stand behind the why, then the when question is really key, as we talked about, and the surrounding yourself with the best team. That's really sage advice, and happy to give 3, Nick, seeing as you didn't ask. The other one is just if you are in a situation like us, you've got the interests of 5 human beings to balance going through a complex process like that. It's just to be as honest as possible with each other, really avoid those surprise or unpalatable compromises later down the line, because it's such an emotional roller coaster of a journey. You've got to be there to support each other through it, and you've got to have trust in the people running the process on your behalf, but you've also got to have trust in each other, and that only comes from the candor of knowing where people are coming from on an individual level.
Thank you for the extras. Some really good points there. And I think both, some really good advice, and just sort of rounds off everything you've shared today. So thank you very much. It was brilliant, firstly, to catch up and hear how the business has grown and where you're taking it, and actually the benefits of that marketing tie-up with Havas, but equally going into the weeds on the sale and really getting sort of under the skin of that, because I know that'll help a lot of my listeners. I guess the last question then is for anyone who has listened to this, they want to find out more about yourselves, they want to find out more about Gate One. Where would you point them to? Where can they get in touch?
I mean, from my perspective, LinkedIn, I'm just there, or, if they want to email me direct, very happy to do so, david.holliday@gate1.co.uk. If anybody's out there and wanting some advice in this space, very happy to catch up.
Yeah, likewise, all contact, welcome. Happy to share our perspectives for what they're worth. So you can also reach me on email, simon.dennis@gate1.co.uk, and I'm sure you put our contacts in the show notes, Nick. So very happy to share further.
Definitely. Well, like you say, so I'll put those in the show notes so anyone can get them. And otherwise, chaps, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this. It's been great to catch up.
Thanks, Nick. It's been a pleasure.
Cheers, guys. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Climbing Consulting. If you have any guest recommendations, comments, ideas, thoughts on how I can make this show better for you, just drop me an email. It's nick@createengage.co.uk, and I really look forward to hearing from you.